Colombia is a country rich in culture that was developed and cultivated through the mixing of many nations throughout history. One of the major influences on Colombia's culture is that of colonialism. Before the 1500s, Colombia's diverse landscapes and environmental biodiversity were home to a variety of indigenous tribes such as Guane, Quimbaya, and Wayu. However, after the discovery of Colombia by Spaniard Alonso Ojeda, the Spanish began the process of colonizing Colombia, leading it to become an integrated colony of the Spanish Empire. Colombia's development by Spain continued in search of gold when El Dorado myth surfaced, in which it was believed that within the territory of Colombia there was a magical city where everything was made of gold. As Colombian colonization continued, European and Catholic cultures mixed with the African slaves brought over by the Spanish and the indigenous people to create a new and diverse culture within Colombia. Nowadays, the effects of colonialism can still be seen over Colombia. From food to art, architecture, and language, each aspect of Colombian culture has somehow been touched by this history.
One of the major effects of colonialism is the Catholic Church's influence throughout the country. The Spanish and Roman Catholic religion arrived in Colombia in 1499, and we can still see the influence today. In the colonial period, the Catholic Church was created and in charge of most of the public institutions, such as teaching facilities, health facilities, and jails. The Church has always been a central part of the country, and today more than 80% of the population are baptized or plan to be baptized in the Catholic Church. The Catholic faith is a central part within Colombia, and this is especially present in the town plazas. Throughout the country, these plazas are the gathering place where people socialize and go to church. The architecture of these churches is a reflection of 17th century Spanish colonialism. The interior design of the churches reflects the influence of medieval and Renaissance churches in Spain. The country's colonial buildings reflect their Spanish houses laid around a central patio to be found both in colonial towns such as Santa Fe or Bogota, Cartagena, or in rural haciendas throughout the country. Today, in large cities like Cartagena or Santa Marta, the colonial architecture is still a large part of the culture, and these cities have worked hard to keep the buildings and walls in the same condition.
Another aspect of colonialism in Colombia can be seen through their coffee production. It is not known exactly when coffee was brought to Colombia, but most people agree that it was brought sometime in the 18th century by Jesuit priests José Gumilla and Francisco Romero when they arrived from Europe. The European colonizers tried to force the local people to change their crops to coffee, but they were met with much resistance. So the priests came up with an idea to grow coffee production in the region. Since the Catholic Church had already converted many of the indigenous people, the priests began telling people to plant 3 to 4 coffee plants as penance when they came to confession. The Archbishop of Colombia soon heard of this practice and ordered all churches in the country to use coffee planting as a form of penance. Colombia began exporting coffee for the first time, sending 2,500 bags to the U.S. and was sending over 170,000 bags by 1875. Today, Colombia is the third largest coffee producer in the world, with coffee generating about 800,000 jobs in the country and making up over 4% of their total economy. Although coffee was brought to Colombia by Europeans, it is now a large part of the Colombian identity and is a source of pride for many Colombian people.
The aftermath of colonialism is very apparent in the current state of Colombia's indigenous populations. In 1499, the first Spanish explorer, Alonso de Ojeda, reached Colombia. 1525, however, marked the beginning of the Spanish Empire's systematic colonization of Colombia. The first standing Spanish settlement in Colombia was Santa Marta, a city that still stands today near the lands once belonging to the Tairona people. The legend of El Dorado accelerated the Spanish takeover of Colombia and its indigenous people. According to the myth, a chief of the Muisca people would cover himself in gold dust and enter into the waters of Lake Guatavita while attendants threw in objects of gold and precious metals. The myth led Spanish settlers on several expeditions to find hidden cities of gold while they exploited indigenous land and people. After decades of Spanish colonization, the highly advanced Muisca society had collapsed as their leaders were executed and remaining survivors were forced into slavery. Today, descendants of the Muisca people have lost much of their culture and land as a result. The traditional language is rarely spoken as indigenous languages were banned in 1770. Despite Spanish control, the indigenous traditions and knowledge, such as herbal medicine, are still apparent in current society. The Muisca people, known for their use of the coca plant, discovered the plant's healing abilities long before the modern pharmaceutical companies. One of the most apparent Examples of colonial effects on Colombia's indigenous peoples can be found in the city of Guane, which was once the capital city of the Guane people. Today, the city bears the appearance of a colonial town lost in time. The town is easily recognized by its colonial Spanish architecture, but traces of the indigenous people are hard to find. The Guane people once lived throughout Chichimeca Canyon, where their pictographs remain. Today, the canyon is protected, but the focus is not on the people who once inhabited the land. Outside a small Guane museum is a park dedicated to extreme sports. Existing indigenous people of Colombia still face struggles today, including economic hardship and loss of native lands. Depicted in this street art is a message of support for the indigenous people who still fight for the land rights.